GM Growth Fam, time for another episode. And today I have managed to get the queen of hot takes from crypto Twitter on the podcast. I mean, this woman has seen an IPO, an acquisition, worked with companies like Waze, Groupon, Paxos. I mean, the list goes on. If I could describe Jules as anybody, I would say that she is a stern yet funny yet personable marketer that you definitely need to hear more of. So Jules, thank you so much for being here today.
That's a killer intro. I don't think I can beat that. Except not stern. Nobody's in trouble.
Yeah, that was for the funsies. Anyway,
Okay, cool.
Jules, I mean, I don't know where to even start, but I would definitely go to the Groupon story because I think of the brands that you work with, that's a pretty notable story. And really, just at where it sits within the timeline of tech is a very interesting case study to look at. I definitely wanted to understand, like, what's it like working at a company like Groupon, seeing it grow, seeing it IPO? How did that experience sort of mold you into the marketer you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. You probably saw this look on my face of like sentimentality and like thinking back really fondly on some of the best years of my life. They were also the craziest. I described my time at Groupon as having a job I didn't really have any business having, but managed to hold on to. The company might seem like a punchline now, but at the time we were the fastest growing company of all time, fastest company to hit $1 billion in revenue and go public. Groupon was created by a group of 6 or 7 friends that loved the idea of a collaborative, collective group of people achieving something good. And it started as a charity. People were using our forum to get magazine subscriptions as a group. And, if you think about the way a DAO works or all of this collective action happening in crypto, that's just naturally what people do. And so decided to help them find great experiences and possibly at a discount at the same time. So, Groupon was never intended to be a place where you could save $3. It was a way for you to explore your city and do more with your time than like staring at a computer. What is amazing is that the personas of the founders were so fun and freewheeling and really no bullshit. Like just wanted to connect with the customer in the way that made the most sense to build a community. And as a result, as the person running PR, I was given this license to just experiment and go crazy and have a lot of fun. And I also did things that were really hard. I managed crisis, I managed corporate communications globally. But those moments where we interacted with the customer were by far the best. So I have some really fun memories of the crazy stunts that we did there.
No, and you've definitely done a few of them for sure. And so for anybody who hasn't watched Jules in her early journey, I would recommend you go on YouTube or even at this podcast and see this video of Jules talking about how you build a growth team. And I feel like go-to-market teams are so common. Like it's almost like, yeah, the first 2 people you hire is an engineer and a go-to-market person, right? It's so common knowledge now, especially in the Valley. And obviously, growth marketing as a concept is pretty commonly known within the crypto sphere. And you talked about how growth marketing isn't like a department in itself. It's just a congregation of people within different functions that are probably reporting to different people, but the collective works together towards a natural goal for the company to achieve. And within that, you sort of look at the same problem in like 10 different perspectives. Walk me through when you were doing this at Waze, what was, let's say, the most exciting part or the most interesting part about it? And what was something that was extremely challenging for you? And then how can people replicate that in today's day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, just background on Waze as a product, I think it does not get enough and appreciation for the way that it's built. So, at the time that we were acquired, Apple Maps had issued an apology and said, our maps are so terrible, we recommend you use Waze. And Google acquired us because we had all this real time data that came from the community. People don't realize that there is this ecosystem of volunteer map editors that would put down whether there was an accident or police and just helping each other with things like gas prices and road closures. And because of them, we were able to scale to over 100 countries, 45 languages. They even helped us translate the languages in and out of the app. And at the time we were acquired, we were only like 100 people. So the only way you scale sometimes when you're resource constrained is by having the right people in the right room all of the time and breaking down those barriers. So our growth team was not a separate team. You would have like your home team. So I was leading communications and eventually leading marketing. But if I want to jump to action because I know a hurricane is coming to Costa Rica and we need to do a campaign to alert people, I have to talk to engineering. I have to talk to the front end developer. I need to speak to the person that does social media. So, what was most important for us was to move as quickly as possible and to know that those 7 or 8 people were given the right to make decisions on a dime. And so we met as the growth team once a week. We had our own objectives, and those objectives were completely aligned with the growth of the company. And what I thought our CEO did really well was he said, look, annually, we exist to improve mobility, but we're really trying to save 5 minutes on everybody's drive. That's a very precise, clear mission statement. And if you're sitting in marketing, I want to work with a celebrity or I want to add a new feature to the app, it's really easy to decide if you should say yes or say no or respond to this hurricane over here based on that missive from the CEO. And we did that because the right people were in the right room.
That is such an amazing and powerful example to illustrate something that should be common sense. But a lot of the times, the articulation is probably the differentiating factor for teams like Waze to exist and grow and get acquired, and teams to not be able to do so.
You and I were talking about this before the call. I've worked at 5 or 6 companies since then, and I always suggest the growth team where I suggest these like ad hoc teams around a certain objective. And I haven't found another company that's been willing to do it. And what that tells you is a lot of this is about ego and permission. A lot of this is about red tape and the lack of clarity when there is an emergency or a crisis. But I think, if you're a founder and you're thinking about that one thing that would define success for you this month or this year, if the 6 or 7 people that would be involved in that effort are not already in a group chat or meeting somewhat regularly, you have to tell them to do that or else it's probably not going to happen.
Also, walk me through this particular factor that I see a lot of teams, especially within, let's say, early to growth stage startups. A lot of teams struggle with siloing, where a particular team is working on a particular function and communication seems more like a burden than a requirement from a growth perspective. And it's funny, especially from a product standpoint, because Web3 is a unique case study where marketing really comes before the product.
Mhm.
And a product, I mean, both token and the tech that a team is building. So you're almost selling the dream, but at the same time, you're selling the tech. At the same time, your company is not going to IPO in 10 years. It's going to technically IPO in
3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we spoke about this. So like, tell me how does this happen? Why does this happen? I mean, obviously you've seen it both, been able to solve it internally and as an external stakeholder. Where is the gap? Why does this happen? And then, what can teams do to ensure that it doesn't take place? Because it's generally very detrimental to.
Yeah, again, I think you might be surprised how many companies maybe spin their wheels on a mission statement that sounds great. But when you come in and you say to the employee, like, how are you being measured? And how does that pair up with what the goal is for this year for the business? There is absolutely no alignment, or the employees don't even know how their day to day work is being measured to know if they're doing a good job. And this is particularly true for people in creative fields, but it's not the exception. So many of the companies that I advise can't answer that question and can't break it down into like, look, we measure 3 things. We measure number of new customers, we measure uptime, and we measure, I don't know, revenue. So, I think a lot of this has to come from leadership, and it should be the thing that drives resource allocation, time allocation, and then you're able to hire people in clear roles with clear mandates and not worry so much about the title, but their ability to sense their partners on the other teams to make things happen.
So you're telling us that the TGE date is not the vector to look at for teams? Because I felt like 90% of the teams do that in crypto.
Yeah, it's like the everything after that, right? I mean, sadly, like I know some companies that had so much sticker shock around launching through their TGE that they just went out of business because they couldn't even keep up with the expenses. So there's just like a lot more there that needs to be planned in terms of building a sustainable business before, during, and after. I think in most cases that probably doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's true. Although, just to sort of flip it on the other end, when you came into Web3 and started working with crypto companies, I think Paxos was the first one, correct?
Right.
So you're coming into a crypto team that at the time Paxos was narratively speaking at the peak,
Hmm.
although that company is extremely solid even today.
Sure.
But walk me through, where was the challenge? Where was the gap? Where did you have to like almost readjust your go-to-market playbook to fit in within this structure? Although there were a lot of similarities, obviously, but maybe, yeah, walk me through some of those early challenges.
Yeah, I've got two for you, and they're sort of interesting as they like I think define where crypto was in 2021. One is that my personal infrastructure just broke immediately, meaning I had, I don't know, 15 years in the Valley, and suddenly not a single VC was remotely interested in what I was doing. My friends from New York and San Francisco just sort of didn't get why I was doing this. They thought I was crazy. I have great relationships with the media and used to be able to snap my fingers and get you on CNN or Bloomberg. And suddenly they were like, ew, like, you're doing what? And it took a very long time to convince them to just kind of keep my number handy for when they were going to come around to crypto someday. And that matters because the agencies that I usually work with didn't understand what the goal was or what we were selling. So I couldn't work with them. And the talent that I would have hired for my team couldn't move over because they didn't know what I was doing. So that stuff caught me off guard. And I realized I needed to build an entirely new network and start over, even while I myself was learning crypto. I think the second thing, which is very hands-on to marketing, is that when I joined Metaplex is so much more developer heavy marketing, degen narrative, really rooted in the trenches. And I kind of had to walk back my own sophistication. And I don't mean that in a snobby way. I mean that at the time, everything in crypto felt very dark, moody, black and purple developer stuff. And, the brand building was happening in the trenches, like on Twitter with the five most important developers talking about royalties and whether or not you should be building on Metaplex, and technically speaking, why that was important for the future of Solana. And coming in as like this CMO marketer, I wanted to build the whole category with a big, huge campaign. And I wanted to talk about growth and I wanted to work with all these companies, when the reality was I needed to be in the trenches, like having the conversation that people wanted to have today. And at the time, Tiffany was running marketing at Magic Eden, and I really looked up to her and I looked at the way that she engaged with the community, and I learned a lot from that. And so it actually wasn't my job to force like a step change in crypto marketing at that time. It was better to meet people where they were and understand the assignment for the business itself.
Yeah, makes sense. And especially on the being in the trenches part, because I feel like just by nature of disorganization within crypto, especially at that stage, is so like ever present, where the only way you can have a tap on the nerve, per se, of what's happening with your product, with your brand in the market, is having those conversations with people and understanding the culture a little bit, right?
Totally.
Where, why is it that people are going completely bonkers about one transaction that happened on Ethereum from one wallet to another, which didn't tangibly change anything, but now, the whole market's kind of responding to it? Or just, how can one VC announcement of a project in like one corner or one niche of Web now have butterfly effects into all other niches, and now everybody needs to pay attention to it? It's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting, and you're right, because in 2021, Solana was the place all NFTs were being minted, and it was happening on Metaplex. And so you look at the business case and you're like, why the hell doesn't anybody understand how special this is? Drawing on my own background and community, which was every company I had ever worked at, I saw that Solana had the vibe, it had the DNA, and it was so closely knit at that stage that all they wanted was a win. And the more that Metaplex could show that there was a win on the board and that they were working for the ecosystem, people were going to champion Metaplex even if they didn't have skin in, that particular project. So it was a great learning for me to look at what I was coming in with as a marketer, and actually leading on those things were going to serve me the best anyway. I just needed to kind of trust my instincts.
Let's talk a little bit more about that instinct of yours, where I feel like you have a lot of contrarian beliefs. And obviously, you're seeing a lot of different metas play out within the market, whether that's from a growth hacking perspective, incentives, points, Kaito. I mean, it changes every week almost. But I wanted to understand, like, what is your most contrarian belief that you feel like, especially when you're trying to build in the long term, you're trying to build a sustainable project. What is the North Star that most marketers on different teams should keep in mind and then communicate that to founders, obviously vice versa. But yeah, what's that belief? How do we move beyond metas to building a sustainable business? Seems like the most obvious business question, but yeah, we get
Yeah,
asked
right.
that because yeah, that's crypto.
I don't know if I can make this succinct, but I'll try. I think that when I think of the crypto world, the blockchain world, it's so exciting to me because there's so many different use cases. If you get a job in crypto and I get one in crypto, we just may never even work together because there's so many different utilities for the technology, right? But I do think that for where we are right now, you can call it institutional, but it's like the companies making revenue with customers that do other things in tech, right? And then there's the casino. And the casino is where we wrap things and trade things and sell things. And I'm not knocking one or the other. I do think that most effective marketing depends on what kind of world we want to live in. And so things like KOLs and airdrops are very effective for the companies that exist to transact and to have very quick, almost like a fast fashion relationship with their customer. If you want somebody to pump and dump and buy something and trade and swap it and do what you're going to do, those things spur immediate activity, and they are probably the most effective than this long-term narrative campaign. However, long-term companies take their time. And so the world that I think we want to live in is one where these companies are making money and they're sticking around for 5 or 10 years, or they're merging with other tech companies to reinforce the strength of the internet and technology as a whole. Those companies market in a way where they're building in feedback loops and incentive structures that don't attract people looking to get rich quick because those are the expendable customers anyway. So maybe the contrarian belief is like, it's really not about what the most effective marketing is overall, because there's not going to be one concrete answer. But if we want this technology to finally be adopted, it's probably the marketing plan with the long-term view. Does that make any sense?
No, that makes complete sense, and especially on the point of just being truthful about who you are, what you're selling, and why you're selling it, right?
Sure.
Because I feel like a lot of teams, I mean, controversial here, but a lot of teams are not truthful, or let's say pretending to be something that they're not, right? And a lot of times it manifests in different ways where you're trying to basically build something different, but you're selling something completely different. And I get where that comes from because you're almost trying to shoehorn yourselves into where the larger narrative, or let's say
Right. Where the
the
meta is.
larger mind share, where the meta is. But at the same time, if you lose sight of the fundamental product that you were building in the first place because of the meta, now you're a dead company within a year. And this
I
is like
totally
played out
agree.
over and over and over again. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, definitely, I do agree with that.
But I would say too, when we talk about being honest or dishonest or a good or a bad person, look, like some of these founders don't know what they're building yet or haven't decided and are going to let the market tell them. And that is one strategy, right? And it doesn't mean that they're inherently trying to mislead anyone. And similarly, some marketers are going to listen to the voice of the customer. And the loudest voice of the customer right now, I think, are people that want to make money and want things to turn over quickly and prove their value, and then they kind of move on to the next airdrop to farm or whatever it is. So I think we can look at people's motives and say it's a really exciting time to build. People want to have jobs and they want to participate, but I hope that over time, as an industry, we are more interested in building concrete companies with a backbone that are going to be around for some time.
Honestly, keeping the cynicism aside for a minute, because I'm being too harsh, but at the same time, I get the emotion, especially from a founder's perspective, because you're always in survival mode unless and until you've truly broken out and found
For
some
sure.
level of PMF. And when you're in that kind of stage, you want to latch on to anything that makes survival easy or convenient, or at least progress at a good pace. So,
Sure.
no, makes sense. But let's maybe talk about the flip side of it for a minute. When crisis does strike, and you've done this a lot of different times in your past, I'm really interested in knowing when there is a PR crisis, when there is something that is not going right. What's a principle from your experience that you feel like can really help teams, and let's say even a person for that matter, in that kind of situation to navigate themselves out of a complete disaster?
Yeah. So some crises that I've worked on, we've had customer fatalities at some of the companies that I've worked at, which it has to be the most devastating thing that can ever happen to your customers, your relationships, your employees, you name it. Forget about the company, right? It's the people side. I've worked on data breaches, international border incidents, like you name it. And I think that there's two just very basic things that feel counterintuitive, but are extremely true in crisis, which is like it's actually not about you. And so it's so easy for the executive or the brand to say, how do I fix this for myself so that I come out in a positive light, so that the Google posts go away and our SEO doesn't hurt and the pain is over. But it's so not about you. It's about your customers. It's about your employees. It's about whatever damage you might have done out in the world inadvertently, right? And like the focus needs to be there. And then the other thing is, I had one of my German friends say once, like, you're not me, are not as interesting as you think you are. Meaning people kind of don't give a shit. They just want to know, like, cut to the end. What's the solution? How are you going to fix this? I don't want to hear about your personal drama about why this took place and like you feel bad and blah, blah, blah. So, I was thinking back to a month or two ago when the meme was everywhere with the people from the Coldplay concert, and Astronomer hired Gwyneth Paltrow to come in and do that like quick commercial to take advantage of all of this, attention. And they got a lot of flack for people saying, shame on you, you're trying to drum up sales. I actually saw something different, which was this was like a mortifying time for a lot of people. But, I don't know that company. I imagine you're an average person who took a job at a startup that you believed in, and you're coming to work and you're like, this is so awkward. This is terrible. And what if we lose investors or customers and you're worried about your own job, right? And what people see when they sit on the sidelines of these disasters is, well, that's a crappy company, or this is so embarrassing for them, I'm not going to buy their product, or they're trying to make it about them again. What I saw was them kind of diffusing the air in the room and saying, like, look, we can all talk about this. This thing happened. It's awkward. It's okay for you to talk. And now we're going to move on and go back to business. And your employees really need to hear that, right? So I think the surprising thing in a moment of crisis is that it actually is a time for your brand to get even closer to your customers and your stakeholders, but it's got to be done in a really thoughtful way.
Yeah, no, I think that particular case study is an interesting one to look at, because I've seen other examples of that. One interesting one I was talking to a previous guest about was the Pepsi ad from a
Yeah.
little while back as well. So I think there is a certain level of, I'd say, and this is not always the case, not all teams, but sometimes teams, because of the bureaucracy that exists within an organization, sometimes are missing the subtleties of, does it even make sense? Or are we just swayed away by the bureaucratic vanity of, yeah, the whole team's on board. with a particular idea. So it's probably going to be amazing and people are going to love it. So yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. One thing I'm interested to know here also is a lot of different teams now, especially in the Valley, with a lot of these newer AI companies, are depending extremely a lot on shock value, especially when it comes
Yeah.
to like stunts, videos, so on and so forth. Nothing new there for sure, but it's almost gone to the extent where somebody like an Ace now says, okay, media is a huge focus for
Mhm.
a fund like us, right? And every single company is a media company. I mean, of course, it's not a new
Sure.
narrative, it's been here for a while. But when you do perform a stunt or you do put out a controversial video and doesn't go right, one, like some part of that is crisis, but also it's not crisis per se. You're getting bad PR, and there's always a statement of all PR is good PR,
Yeah,
which I
bullshit.
don't agree with. But I would love to know like what your opinion of the newer age startups going for shock value, really investing in media that can grab attention than the ones that are more traditional.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm so not impressed, right? Like when I mentioned Groupon before, this is a fun week for me because I'm planning like a reunion for a bunch of us that were there early on. So we're doing that at the end of this week. So I'm in a sentimental mode where I've been thinking about a lot of these things. But like, let me tell you a few of our stunts that we did. Groupon is about celebrating local businesses. And so we had people apply to live off Groupon for 1 year where they had to quit their jobs and we confiscated their wallets. And we made this guy a paper suit out of Groupon's and took his underwear. And then he had to just leave the office in downtown Chicago in this paper suit and use it for hotel stays and navigate his way around the world to eat and drink off of Groupon's for a year. And he didn't see his girlfriend and he hitchhiked to the Today Show and took a hot air balloon ride and did all this stuff and then, won a sweepstakes at the end. We announced that Groupon was going to launch. And if you dated one of our employees and had a child, that we would pay for its college tuition. I don't think that that would probably play well in today's environment, but this was, 2010. And we also sold baby names. So for like ten or $15,000, we would name your baby, and 5 people bought the Groupon, and we named all the babies Clembo. I don't know what Clembo means. It came from our editorial team. But the point is there were 5 people that were like, I'm in, and sent us $15,000 to name their baby, like as a joke. And then we had some Super Bowl ads that made fun of deforestation or saving the whales. And you're looking like you saw those. So, but at that moment, we had done all this other crazy stuff and we didn't think we could make anybody surprised by our brand. And those ads aired during the Super Bowl. And our whole team was together in Chicago. We were in this big bar, everybody's in their 20s. And we were so proud of this moment that the company had made it. And these ads were really made by a very small circle of people in the humor team and our CEO. So none of us had really seen them. And the backlash was swift and immediate. And we had PETA coming and sending threats to our office. Several of our executives got death threats at their homes, anti Semitic stuff sent to their families, and on and on. And when you've been on the receiving end of that and you're getting a box of bullets at your office, or you're having people follow you home and throw paint on your car, it's not funny anymore, right? And I think we as a brand learned a lot about what it felt like to be in the spotlight. But anybody who says that they want to alienate their customers or make decisions that will have people misunderstand you have never actually lived through an experience like that, because getting more traffic to the website doesn't mean that it converted to the goodwill that we lost. It sucked.
You had a humor team at Groupon.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
had a team called Humor Team. Okay, interesting.
They're the funniest people in the world. And today they were writing for Colbert. One has a show coming out on Netflix. They're
Wow.
brilliant. And I always mention them because Groupon was originally built sort of like a magazine behind the scenes. And while it was really fun to partner with them, and certainly I came up with some ideas, I didn't come up with the craziest ones. And their tone of voice is really what led to our brand. And they deserve 1,000% of the credit for that.
I also think, like, to a certain extent, though, and in most cases, especially if you take this to the extreme, never really works out great for you. Like at a certain point, you have to neuter things down and be normal. With be creative, but be normal with the kind of marketing that you're doing. And I think like a lot of these teams do it because it brings a lot of attention to you. Kudos to you. Fair enough. If you do it the right way and you're not offending people, there's no harm in that. But most people, and there was this time, I don't know, 2016, 17, where pranks were a huge deal.
Hmm.
And then, there were prank YouTubers that were climbing up the ranks, and that media essentially came crashing down to the extent where it just doesn't exist anymore. Although it can go both ways, it's really tricky sometimes for a lot of teams to perceive how their brand can do similar kinds of things
Sure.
in the context of crypto. So, what are certain, let's say, teams that you've looked at that have done something similar, something really great? Because I feel like there are a ton of products within Web3 that could leverage, not crazy ideas, but similar ideas from Web 2 that can bring you a lot of attention. It's not that expensive to execute on as well. Why do more teams not do it?
Yeah,
Is it
you're
just
right.
that, is it just that, I only care about developers and developers really don't care about stunts like this? Because I've actually heard that answer. Or is it something else?
Well, I think so. You hit on something really important, which is like, again, you sort of had to be there to see it. But our our brand, the Groupon brand, was every stunt that we did. It's not like we were a payment processor and then one day sold a deal where we would come and tuck you in at night by this creepy guy named Michael, which we did sell. That was so endemic to who we were that that was what people were signing up for. It was almost like what college humor used to be or something like that. And so you have to know who you are. And I think even at the time of the Super Bowl ads, it kind of was who we were, right? It probably, I think we took for granted that most people in America's homes did not know that. And so that was probably our bad, right? But for these other companies, you can learn so much by looking at the playbooks of what has worked in consumer tech. And I always shout out Winnie with Chipped Social, who makes the glue on like adorable nails with the NFC chip in them. You know, I have no affiliation with Winnie. I just have been a fan for a long time. And she recently did a satellite media tour in Los Angeles. This was something that was part and parcel for every single consumer company in the early 2000s, where you would go to a TV studio, you would show your little product, and you would talk to 15 cities in 1 hour and just like knock them out. And I did 100 interviews in a day. But people look at Winnie and they're saying that's so novel. It's back to school. It's so natural. Winnie knows exactly where her customer is. She knows what they like to do. She knows who influences their purchasing behavior. And she knew that, if her consumers are on TikTok, maybe mom will be watching the morning news. And that's like yet another loop of a person that could buy this product. And so I'm really in awe of her because it seems like this comes very naturally to her. For your company, your job is to figure out where your customer is and what they think about all day long and where they are, where they make those decisions. And maybe you're not going to do a stunt in Times Square. It's probably not where your developer is like sitting and hanging out. Maybe you could give them this larger than life experience that makes their life better at Token 2049, and maybe not. Maybe you do it in Denver because you know that that's where they're all holed up and skiing for the weekend and you sponsor the hotel suite they're in. But there's always an opportunity for you to do the thing that is a little bit more unsustainable, but draws a connection between you and the customer. But you cannot do it unless you know precisely who you are and what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. I also feel like a lot of teams are focusing very heavily on video now because of that. Because I think
Hmm.
a certain level of understanding has come into people where, yes, storytelling is going to be a huge part of where most crypto companies go towards. Because I also feel like we were in this world where there was Web 2 and there was Web 3. And now there is a almost like a culmination of the two,
Hmm.
especially from more of a execution campaign sense than anything else because I see a lot of similar lines, true lines being drawn from there. So would you say that the new go-to-market playbook is this for most crypto teams? And let's say for teams outside of crypto as well, is there any like new North Star that they should be looking at? Or do you feel like it's just the fundamentals, get those right, and you know the packaging it comes in could be different, but the fundamentals are the way to go.
Yeah, what I described a second ago was customer journey work. Like, give me the name of this person and what they do all day, what they like, what they don't. But more importantly, like, where are they sitting and what are they reading when they realize they have a problem? And then when they make this decision to either use your product or use somebody else's. And you even go so far as to say, they are Googling while they are in a product meeting and they have 3 weeks left in the quarter and blah, 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 blah. This really helps you filter out where you should spend money and where you shouldn't. And I think that our marketers in crypto sometimes will always conveniently be able to say, well, I mean, everybody's over here on Twitter and this is the fastest and easiest thing. And that's fine. We can check that box. But if you're talking about real growth, again, your founder has a customer in mind, and all of you should be living in the, not the metaverse, but like the mental model of wherever that place is existing. The other thing that, just a prediction, I think, rather than trying to figure out, is it going to be TikTok or stunts or this or that? Again, I'm thinking about narratives and newsjacking. I think that wealth and saving are probably the two easiest ways to get in the door, and they always have been. Right now, especially in the States, everything is expensive. Tariffs are hitting us very hard. People that both are yearning for this glamorous lifestyle in pop culture also cannot afford it. And so for crypto, I mean, what an opportunity either to teach people how to save better, to teach people about wealth, or to teach people to take control of their finances. And companies can be playing into that hard, and they never even have to mention crypto. They can just, bridge people over to the product if the product is easy enough to use.
Yeah, exactly. But being the imperative imperative word about it. But I also feel like a lot of teams have understood the easy, or let's say the convenient UI UX part of it, but the communication part is really where the gap is. And a lot of times now, especially teams that are more Web 2.5 than Web 3, are especially struggling with, should we even say that there was crypto
Yeah.
behind it? And I mean, I always was talking to this founder yesterday, and I was like, would you say that the website that you have uses HTTPS, or would you just show what the website does?
Mhm.
Right. So like it's a similar kind of example. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head with it for sure. One thing just on the, let's say, the future narratives part of that, especially having seen it from both the Web 2, Web 3 angles, I would love to know what your thoughts are on the interactivity of products, or let's say campaigns, actually, particularly as we move forward. So there is the assumption that right now, a lot of the campaigns that we see are consumption based. So you see a TikTok, you see a YouTube video, and then you're sort of gaining the knowledge from that and then choosing what your intent to whether buy or not is. Moving to more interactive apps almost, because app building becomes as easy as prompting. Or let's say building interactive experiences becomes extremely easy digitally. So there is a proliferation of that, and a lot of these platforms intake it. Is that or something else the next, let's say, 100x opportunity that founders and teams should be looking at from a technical standpoint, and especially when it comes to marketing campaigns?
That's such a great question. I'm not sure where we are right now. I think it really varies on the customer. But if we're talking about consumers, I can tell you my most savvy friends living in New York City and San Francisco that have been in tech for a long time, plus my nephews that are in their teens and 20s, and are far cooler than me, obviously, but are surrounded by, the messages of what they should be doing and what it means to be out in the world and be young. Like, none of those people know how to go buy any crypto, period. And they're very smart and they're online all the time and just out living in the world. And like, until we solve that problem, it's either in the flow so much of how they use Venmo and PayPal and those integrations that you're seeing, that they're learning more there, or it's in so much paid marketing that every time you go into ChatGPT or you're Google searching and you're just given this like 1, 2, 3, now boom, now you have a wallet. Or maybe the next time you buy a Mac computer, I don't know. Just consumers don't feel like they really need to go do this right now. And the ones that have a cursory interest are very confused right away. So it is on us to bring it to them. And I think some products are better positioned to do that than others, like a wallet, for example.
Yeah, I think and that's where, let's say, the distribution gap also comes into the picture, where, I mean, you want to have more avenues for people to experience crypto, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be them going on an exchange and buying crypto, or
Right.
them downloading a wallet because one of their friends wanted to split the bill in crypto. Like,
Right.
that happens. And so, yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to more teams getting the grasp of, let's say, the token mechanics of their of their project may not be the only end all be all that they should be concerned about, because a lot of times teams are swayed by or make decisions based on how their tokens performing. And I mean, it goes not only to the extent of what campaigns we launch, but how many team members do we need to have? Like, what are our, what our eventual future is going to look like, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of critical decisions that teams are making based on factors that may not be as critical as it might seem, but that becomes the center of attention because, hey, that's the one place that most people are going to get to know about your product.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it in Web 2, when you are gearing up to go public, either the investor or a board member or something will swoop in and start landing the message with employees that everything is about to change. And this is a really exciting moment, but also, the DNA is going to feel different now because you work for the shareholder. And there's a part of me, I think tokens are really exciting. I understand why they exist. I think a token layer on top of Waze would have been very obvious and fascinating if the technology were ready at that time. But there's a part of me that feels like token launches that happen so early are a mistake because you're essentially running a mini public company and you haven't even had a minute to know who you are as a company, and now you're going public, right? And it's still these same dynamics where there's a lot of whiplash inside the business, and you're reporting to people that, meaning the shareholders, the token holders, who might not have your best interests in mind because they haven't had enough time to even develop any faith in the product. So it's interesting how these patterns repeat from, one era to the next.
Any, uh, given that we're on patterns, and I know you're particularly very perceptive about pat- patterns specifically, I would love to know, what are some of the patterns that you're seeing that you feel like a lot of people are not talking about that are going to be extremely important over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think everyone is talking about how AI is taking the place of a lot of creative prompts at a basic level. We know people use it for copywriting and art direction and things like that. But I have been struck by how some of the most well spoken, successful spotlight executives and talents in my network have just completely outsourced their own voice and their own thinking to ChatGPT, which you see posted on Twitter or LinkedIn. And the minute you see it, I have this visceral reaction to, I know you didn't write this. I know you don't think like this. And you were such a wonderful writer before because I knew who you were. It's not about cheating. It's that if everybody speaks with the same voice, then the algorithm is just going to look very, very cut and paste. And ironically, you having a well written post is not going to cut through because you're going to look like everybody else. I really think we're not talking enough about that. And if you think about what that means in mass for art, for brands, for brand books, for look and feel, what happens to the marketer or to the communications person is the only thing separating you from an LLM becomes taste and curation. And I think taste comes from a well developed sense of all of the inputs in the world from history and art and science and and curation comes from having the good sense and the context to know what resonates with your customer. You can see pretty quickly a lot of marketers are not going to make it through that jump. A lot of our junior marketers don't understand why that's an issue or where they fit in the cycle. So they just outsource to ChatGPT. And a lot of agencies that I really respect now, the work they're putting out is not good. So the next 12 to 18 months, I think, will be fascinating for the people that really want to dig into the fundamentals and position their taste and their bar as the thing that is going to be the 100x driver, I think. And more human
Yes.
ghostwriting too.
No, 100%. I feel like I saw someone tweet about this, which is funny, but also eerily like I don't know what the feeling is, but like spelling mistakes are gonna
Oh, yeah.
be the
To
way to
prove.
know
Yeah.
to prove if you're, you know, actual human is writing it. And so anyone with bad grammar is gonna be a great writer in the future
It's
because
crazy.
everything looks so polished. And there is this concept of, I'm sure you're aware of the uncanny valley, right?
Yeah.
Where if every human being is using AI to outsource their creative output, then we're going to go in an uncanny valley of everything seeming the same.
Yeah.
I feel like we actually had this moment until the models sort of evolved and changed to it, where a lot of the copy on LinkedIn specifically, because it's a place where it proliferates more than probably it does on Twitter,
Totally.
but people actually saw through a lot of the posts where they felt like, yeah, this doesn't seem like you, or it doesn't seem right, right? And even if you have a unpolished take, that suddenly becomes like, oh, this is amazing. Like, we should be talking more about it. And I was talking to a few of my friends who are slightly junior to me, and I was like, read as many books as you can get your hands on. And I hate reading,
Mhm.
by the way. I felt like, because the examples and the case studies, and maybe this podcast is also like one of the ways I really wish people experience it, that this is going to be the only way you survive in a future where
100%.
AI can do most of the work, most of the, let's say, putting together stuff and polishing it and publishing it. And then you really, the way you survive is being a good strategist. The core of being a good strategist is understanding the same problem for a lot from a lot of different perspectives. And that's how you will edge out the most of the markets.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
no.
right.
I've had a similar feeling. I felt like, yeah, not too many marketers are talking about it. So that was interesting.
It
Well,
keeps me up at night. That's how scared
yeah.
I am.
No, same
But
same
it's
here.
it's an
Same here.
opportunity too. It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I get so many questions from mentees who say, I don't understand all the fundamentals, but I think this career path is right for me and I'm good at X, Y, and Z. How do I level up? And it's like, read a marketing book, any marketing book, or go to a museum and see what stirs an emotion in you, and then follow that feeling and find out why, and fall in love with art or fall in love with science. I don't know, but we cannot outsource all of our thinking and all of our personality to ChatGPT, because you're going to get caught in a situation where you don't know why you think the things that you think. And I just think it'll yield a lot of stuff that's kind of boring and not good for us.
Before I let you go, one last question that I have is, if you could go back in time and rewrite your journey from the ground up to end up in a similar place to where you are today, what is one learning that you have now that you wish that you had at the beginning of?
Oh man, I have a few. I started my career in communications and PR. I thought I would be like a music publicist or something. And I was always told to stay in my box and, call the media, get somebody on the morning news or whatever. And I quickly learned that I needed to do more than that, or I had other interests and other instincts. I never had a manager or a mentor say to me, you might be really good in marketing, which is the practice of aligning brand and growth together. I had to really stumble my way there until the CEO at Waze actually put me in that seat after working with me for a while. And then communications, of course, is my first love too. So I would say that having a nonlinear career path is wonderful when you figure out what you're good at. How could we ever know that in college or in our first job? And you're well within your right to pick up what you like and what you don't and craft a role into that. The other thing I would say, I was always of the mindset that I had to have another job before I could leave my current role. And then something really wonderful happened, which was that I was laid off. So FTX was the biggest investor in Metaplex. And when that implosion happened, the right thing to do was Metaplex letting go of most of the staff until they sort of knew what the hell was going to be happening, and I I'm so happy to see that they were stabilized and are still a force in Solana, of course. But of course, they got rid of the marketing department, BD, anything that was non-technical. And the reason it was wonderful was because I could go on LinkedIn and I'm available and I want to work at a VC fund. And prior to that, I could only work in jobs where a recruiter approached me or I approached the company. And it is very freeing to wave your flag and tell people exactly what you want to go do. And I would suggest everybody do that at some point in their career because I wound up exactly where I wanted to be.
That's an awesome message. I couldn't have found a better way to end this. Jules, thank you so much for taking out the time and being here today. It was
This was
lovely
so much
chatting with you.
fun. Yeah, you're great. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone in tuned in. See you in the next episode. GM. Bye bye.